My name is Paul Mendez. I'm the author of Rainbow Milk, which follows two narratives. You start in the Black Country in the West Midlands with a first-person narration by a Jamaican immigrant called Norman Alonzo. He's a young man with a young family, a young wife, who expect to come to England to find, a warm welcome, a good job, and prosperity for their children to grow up into. But what they do find is racism, illness, and just a very, very different experience. And then we jump forward into the 21st century, to the third-person narrative around Jesse McCarthy, who's a 19-year-old young black queer man from a Jehovah's Witness family who escapes the Black Country and moves to London to become a sex worker in order to find new notions of love and family. What do you fancy listening to? Nothing Christmassy. What have you got? Anything you like? Do you like hip-hop? The Roots? Or is that too obvious? He began to talk to himself. Too obvious. St. Etienne's new album. Did you see Donnie Darko? Said Jesse as he watched Owen read down a list of track titles. Yeah, top film. Do you remember the scene during the house party when Donnie answered the door to Gretchen and took her upstairs to his room? What was that song? And he hummed it. Love will tear us apart, Owen laughed. Yeah? Who's that? Owen gave Jesse a strange grin of unexpected brotherhood, then picked out several LPs from the front of the first box and presented them to Jesse on the coffee table, a white, a grey, a black, and a blue. This is the one with Love Will Tear Us Apart on it, he said, tapping a clean, trimmed nail on the grey sleeve printed with Substance in green and Joy Division 1977 to 1980 in white. This is a really good place to start if you're looking to get a wider view of their best work. Well, all their work was their best work. How many albums did they release? Just 2 studio, then several posthumous compilations. I've got everything official. Posthumous? Owen looked at Jesse, shook his head, and laughed. Hurry up with that spliff. With great care, Owen unsheathed the vinyl from a black sleeve and placed it on the turntable as Jesse licked the Rizzler gum and smoothed the roll. This is where you start. Merry Christmas. They held up their glasses and drank. Owen sat down next to him as Jesse sparked up. Thin, white, jagged lines on a black background like skin under a microscope. Jesse handled it as Owen had done, with a sense of deference. It was a piece of black card with only a little bit of writing on the back, the band name, Joy Division, the album title, Unknown Pleasures, and underneath, Fact 10, a Factory Records product. Even before the needle hit the disc, Jesse thought of his night with Fraser in the derelict flats, of the broken glass, rotting joints of window surround, the cold, damp breeze blocks. Owen closed the blinds behind them, though it was only lunchtime. The sound emerging from the floor-based speakers was like nothing Jesse had ever heard. Plosive drums at the beginning, pumping like the heart of a black boy being chased into a dark tunnel by white thugs. And before he had time to understand what he was hearing, they were joined by little black dots of bass, high then low, high then low. A studio effect, like a car sinking in a canal with the radio on, weaved in and out. Jesse felt transported to the deserted foundries and factories of his childhood before they were demolished, cleared away and replaced with car showrooms and supermarkets. The cavities in walls you could climb through to run around the dead, black, oily waste of a century of industrial heft. He missed that world, the sooty, subsiding streets of his ministerial territory, the snotty-nosed children running around, dirty-faced, kicking battered footballs. And then a man started singing in a low baritone, as reverberantly as the instruments around him. Jessie and Owen let their legs stretch out, their feet nestling in the rug underneath the coffee table. Jessie watched Owen blow a plume of smoke up towards the high ceiling above him and wondered what he was thinking. He wanted to ask who the singer was, but didn't want to spoil the depth of engagement. He also wanted Owen to touch him, put a hand on his knee, make some sort of concession, even if he would then have to reject him. But he just passed the spliff back, sipped his champagne and closed his eyes, letting the beats pop in the air and flood the floor. Jessie closed his eyes too. I've got the spirit, lose the feeling, take the shock away. There was no chorus, just a guitar line, then a new verse. The weed went to his head and it was as black as blindness. The rhythm, extruded from drums, bass, guitar, studio effects, and untrained baritone, was perfectly balanced, nothing louder than anything else, yet everything distinctly audible. It sounded different from Level Terrace Apart, but was a better match for his mood. There was light, but like the narrow beam of a headlamp in a mine shaft. A keyboard sound like the glow of white-hot metal. These were the echoes of his childhood. His mother might have been playing soul and R&B at home, but this was the sound of the streets, the factories and warehouses, the canals, the ironworks, the steelworks. I come from a working-class Jamaican family, or Black British family, who, you know, I never had a book in my house growing up. It was all Bible-based literature because they were Jehovah's Witnesses. And, you know, I lie, we had one sort of huge volume of Sherlock Holmes, but it was my mother's and it was her sort of special thing and we weren't allowed to touch it. But even at school, there was no sort of real kind of concentration on diversifying and decolonizing the curriculum at all. My first Baldwin novel was one of his lesser-known, Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone, his 1968 novel. And that as well was the first time I'd read a person of color, a black male character who was gay, or who was actually bisexual, and was simultaneously in a relationship with a black power activist and with a white woman. And I was still in the closet then, and so it was like a huge revelation to me that that it was possible to be a writer while black, which is an extraordinary thing to say, but I just had never sort of read a book written by a black person before up until that point. And that black person could be queer, and openly so. You know, like I said, coming from a Jamaican background, I've been used to homophobia from the Jamaican community. So for me to see a black person sort of writing openly about sexual matters, same-sex sexual matters, was actually very inspiring and sort of electrifying for me, actually. The reason for Black Lives Matter and its sort of mission, I guess, have been very familiar to me for a long time. And, you know, in terms of hashtag doing the work, etc., I've sort of been doing that for maybe 8 years now. So when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and Black Lives Matter sort of found its footing on the international stage, that's when I really sort of started to connect with my own personal issues of lack of education, about my own history, about you know, what it is really to be a black man in the world today. And yeah, like, you know, the sort of issues of my ancestry and sort of how things have only been recorded by white people in power rather than, you know, people of my background being able to sort of use their voice to describe themselves. And those are sort of two of many, many, many reasons behind white supremacy, behind structural racism, and all of the things that we're dealing with and have dealt with for such a long time, but which really sort of came to international attention outside the Black community with the very, very, very sad and horrible murder of George Floyd, which I was immensely troubled and upset by, as many people were. Just the fact that you're seeing, you know, the last movements of a Black man losing their life. And that's sort of given me many reasons for thought. You know, one of them being, you would never see a white man losing their life on a video on the BBC News. That would just never happen. There would be some kind of idea that this person's dignity should be preserved and that their death is not for public consumption, whereas we're seeing this beautiful 6'5" Black man being pinned to the ground and almost his head, almost from some angles, looking detached from his body underneath this police officer's knee. And that's a very traumatic thing to witness, especially when you sort of identify with that person, racially and culturally. It does sort of make every single microaggression that you've ever experienced, it just amplifies them and makes it sort of seem as if you were in that situation, if police came knocking on your door, that's the kind of response, even in Britain, and I say even in inverted commas, that's the sort of response that you have convinced yourself for a long time that you're not going to receive, but that's what you're seeing on BBC News. So it's been very strange for me, you know, publishing a book during this period, that there's, you know, people are buying my book alongside books like Queenie by Candice Carter-Williams, Birdie Dean Everesto's Girl, Woman, Other, Rene Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, because they feel perhaps that they haven't necessarily engaged with Black writing on an equal level before, that they haven't diversified their reading. You know, the publishing industry should be way more diverse. Already, different people's voices should not be silenced or ignored because of their racial or class background or gender background, etc. We just hope that, you know, my book and the books that are also being published by other Black British authors can be part of the resistance and can be part of the change that we need to see in our society. A lot of my childhood memories are situated in Cornwall. It was just always absolutely amazing. And I hadn't been back there sort of between maybe 1992 and last year, when I came with my partner to last year's edition of the Penzance Festival. And I just realized how much I loved it and how lucky we are to have a place like Cornwall in this country, where the water is so clear and clean and the beach is so beautiful and the sort of sunset's so gorgeous and such fantastic food. Cornwall is probably one of my favourite places as a county in the UK. I'll see you at North Cornwall Book Festival.